And I went up to him and I asked him, after a couple days of witnessing this, I said, Richard, what is it that you're saying to them, and what are you giving them that's making them cry? And he said, well, Jonathan, I carry around a wad of $100 bills, and I've prepared myself for this trip so that if I see those people in need that I'm really moved by to give to, I can do that. And I guess that's why they've responded the way they have. That empowered me to say, I don't know what it is that you do, but I want to do it.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Jonathan Krueger, who helps people build wealth and live a richer life. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. Today's quote is from Steve Jobs. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. Death is very likely the single best invention of life. How do you feel about death? Most people shy away from the subject. We don't want to talk about what the inevitable is. That's a shame. We are going to talk today about living a richer, more intentional life, along with how to build generational wealth. But before we do, let's review last week's action step. Create a system for your legacy. See, these things all come together. As I mentioned last week, this podcast creates a legacy for my kids and grandkids, so they learn money management, life management, how I think. We don't live in silos. What are you doing for your legacy, right? We started off with death. We're still here with death. It's inevitable. As for me, we're getting ready for the next phase of life. Both my kids will be off to college this fall, and it's time to plan for the empty nester syndrome. I thought we would be traveling, but that seems to be on hold, especially on the international side, and many of the conferences that I was supposed to attend are canceled or postponed. I think at this point, we can all realize there's a new normal in the world, and we need to adjust and pivot. This is nothing new. Sure, we may not have had a severe pandemic for 100 years, but that doesn't mean it hasn't happened. The AIDS crisis was big when they didn't know what caused it or how it was transmitted. This is much bigger. As you will hear today, we need to prepare for financial crisis because we as a country are spending more than taxes cover, and we also have to pay back all the Social Security money that was collected. And all of that's coming due, and it's going to create a financial tsunami that once again happens often in history, but maybe not to us. We also need to address how we treat each other, regardless of our heritage or outward appearances. Being an immigrant whose parents were refugees after World War II, I know it's a struggle. But all these storms can be overcome by taking the next step and moving forward. It's not easy, but it's doable. As we started with, external expectations, pride, fear of embarrassment or failure are just mindsets that we can overcome. And we'll chat more about it today. Our guest is Jonathan Krueger, the founder and owner of Lionsgate Advisors, who likes to call himself the advisor's advisor, and for good reason. He's been investing in the personal finance industry since 2000 and now owns the only fee-based investment firm in St. Louis that quarterbacks key strategies for converting tax liabilities to assets. Jonathan also holds his CEPA designation and prides himself on understanding the importance of combining the concept, effort, and process of succession planning for business owners into a clear, simple strategy. He also hosts his own podcast called Living a Richer Life by Design, where he talks about how to use relationships, community engagement, and of course, personal finance to live a more prosperous life. Let's meet our guest. Welcome to Richer Soul, Jonathan Krueger. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you, Rocky. Thanks for having me join you.
And I'm excited to learn from you today. We always like to start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
You know, that's a great question, Rocky. When I got started in life, it was because of my dad and mom's influence of being goal setters. And I don't think had I had that instilled within me from a young age, that would have had the same perspective I do today. So as I reflect on it, mom and dad were always teaching us to save and to give. And then, I was always motivated to earn more. But because they were so focused on being goal setters and really instilled that for me, I was able to get my Eagle Scout at a very young age. In fact, I was incentivized to get it simply because my dad wouldn't let me get my driver's license until I had. And I found that was an important lesson for me, that whatever you set your mind to accomplish, you can achieve. And you just have to have the perseverance and the encouragement to go along with that, and you can accomplish it.
And, sometimes giving those kids those incentives is important. It's funny because my son did his Eagle Scout project, and it actually came together really quickly. And then after he completed it, it took him almost 3 years to turn in the paperwork.
Well, that was the motivation for me to get it done right away.
And so we went through like, can you please just turn in the paperwork? You never know when things are about to change, and, things do change. So it's always good to get it done and to figure out those incentives for kids. So it sounds like your parents were very intentional in what they were looking to do.
Yeah, and mom and dad grew up in homeschooling us as children. And so it was because early on, they're kind of pioneers in the homeschooling world, and their desire was to be able to teach us a biblical worldview. And so a large part of that came with the responsibility of not only how you view finances, but how you're purposeful in life. And so I really believe that's what was the premise was behind the goal setting and being intentional with how we scheduled out our day, to what sports or activities we're involved with, but also as it related to us being diligent with how we stewarded what little we had. And we didn't come from a family of wealth, right? My dad's family, growing up, had come from a family of wealth, but my dad had chosen to go into full-time ministry with the Navigator. So growing up, he had been working with IBM, and then he and I had a newspaper route that I picked up when I was a young teenager. And he and I would get up at 4:30 in the morning and go through newspapers, and then he'd be off to work. And so I learned a strong work ethic from my dad, and just a real giving heart and a warmth, if you will, of hospitality from my mom. And those two things combined really has served me well in being able to become the man I am today, because finances, being intentional wasn't just about finances. It was about your walk with God, your relationship with your family, and your service to your community.
And I like that about how you fit your spirituality into everything else. Does it still fit in with your business? How do you do that?
It does. Yeah. So, Rocky, we really see business as ministry. You see software as a service, kind of the slang SaaS model. I'd really call the way we look at business as the BAM model, BAAM, business as ministry. And from the purpose of how do we live out our life and in completeness, how do we be transparent in everything we do? It doesn't have to be two different worlds. And so often I think the lie is that you've got to be able to keep who you are in the world separate than who you are at work. I believe that when it's based off of strong values that build people up and empower others that you serve and listen, it can really be able to create a legacy that can perpetuate and build momentum.
And that it can. Do you ever get any pushback?
Well, periodically. I think over the past decade, we've only had one person that said, I'm not going to do business with you because you live out your faith. And I said, well, that's just fine. It probably wouldn't be a good fit. But that's only been one time.
And it's funny that they would say it in that way, oh, you live out your faith. And so it's interesting to me. Do you want to do business with someone who isn't in congruence with their beliefs? I mean, that's just kind of mind blowing for me.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'd want someone that is a person of character, regardless of their faith, and that someone that lives out their faith, being consistent with their integrity and values.
And that's a big part of it, right? Being consistent with what you believe and living into your values, because otherwise you cause a lot of issues in life. So I know that you're in the business of investments. And so I think very often we think of that as just money driven. But I've listened to a lot of the work you do, how you talk on the website and your podcasts, and it seems like living a richer life is more than just about money. I'd love for you to expand on that.
No, it's fun. Talking about goal setting, getting back to that, I grew up really looking at how do you grow spiritually, physically, emotionally, socially, and financially, and then breaking it down. So when setting goals each year, whether that's in January or July or whatever time frame it is for you, what I've really found is that living a richer life by design, we had started our podcast, and that's what it's called, because of a desire of how do we serve others and continue to grow in this area, because we are in wealth management, and wealth management is what families desire for legacy is not always the same. So to accelerate your impact, the legacy that you leave, it can take on a lot of different forms. And it can be, how's your family functioning together as a unit? How are you cherishing and building up those relationships? What are you doing to continue to make sure that's instilled in the future generations? And how do you protect that so that it's not lost in isolation or in a breakdown of communication? And so really being intentional, whether that's with the family or with your faith or in business, is how we've looked at life in general. And so it really helps us kind of have a big vision, create steps that we can accomplish to achieve that vision, and then break it down from those steps to task and ultimately keep our eyes on the goal.
And so you talked a little bit about legacy, and clearly for everyone that is different. I grew up as an immigrant, and I saw our family go from having a little bit of money to having a lot of money, and seeing people around me in those same situations. One of the things that I saw was the difficulty in creating values in the kids. When kids grow up with a lot of money, there's a whole sense of entitlement sometimes. And it's how do you bring that balance? I know you deal with a lot of high net worth customers and so forth. How do you advise them, or what have you seen as the best way to raise wealthy children so that they aren't spoiled and they do have that drive and that desire to kind of continue the legacy?
It's great that you painted that word picture for me, just that analogy of your own story, because it reminded me of something that Tom Rogerson, who's with the Gen Leg Company and a featured speaker among family offices, broke down for me one day and shared with me kind of a graph. If you think of the x-axis and the y-axis, right? So on the x-axis, he ended up writing down from the lowest point, interdependence, the highest point, independence, and then on the y-axis, it went from dependent or interdependent to dependent. And so you the farther you went out, you end up having a family that became more interdependent versus dependent. And when we have younger families in the wealth category, oftentimes you start off where everyone's having to be dependent on one another. Maybe, for my family, it was having one car when I turned 16, and the family relied on dad getting to work, and then the rest of the family sharing the car. And I was the oldest of four, and so we'd have to figure out who got the car at what time and where people were going. Versus now, everyone has their own vehicles and is going off in different directions. The story that my sister has or my brothers had about being able to watch me go through the process of buying a vehicle and how to get the financing or what to do is much different than my experience of how to figure out where to go get the money from, or praying that it'd actually occur. Buying my first car for $200 and going, Lord, where's that going to happen? How's that going to happen? If I need a vehicle, and seeing those provisions is much different than what they may have experienced of having it saved or going to get financing for it. And that's typically what happens is, as we accumulate wealth amongst our families and generations, the first generation that creates the wealth, the second generation that gets to really enjoy the fruitfulness of the abundance, and then the third generation that watches it being spent and then has to recreate it if it wasn't passed on to them, is understanding that most families, if they can develop an interdependency amongst in their communication from one generation to the next, and value each family member not just as an individual as part of the family, but as a contributing person, as a contributing individual to the human capital of the family unit, and to talk about what is it that they've learned or what are their own desires, and be able to learn how to be able to see the wealth as a family business versus as an individual inheritance or right. It really starts to look like a conversation that is much like what you'd have with a skilled team of management team, because you've worked through values and you've worked through how are we going to handle conflict, and you've worked through what does the vision look like for our family, and you bring in the generations as you talk through, hey, what does it look like now that we've had this economic crisis in our country, and what does it look like now that we've had these type of health issues in the family, and you're able to work through those conversations together rather than isolating individuals or excluding them from the conversation. When you're able to build that unity is when we found that we're able to pass on a functioning unit versus it being an entitlement attitude. And that's not always the case, right? A lot of times families come to us, they're already in a position where their biggest concern is about the family that has the family member that has a drug addiction, or is going through a divorce, or the kids are being neglected or something like that. And so it can take on different starting points, but the goal ultimately is the same, of everyone being able to be a part of the conversation and to really see some reconciliation occur where maybe it had not been, maybe there had been offense in the past, or maybe they had not realized the need for it to be fleshed out through a family conversation or individually.
And we spent a lot of time because I knew early on that we were going to be wealthy and that my kids were going to grow up in that world. And I knew the pitfalls of what happened in trying to kind of create that margin. And so we would tell our kids, and we still do, they're late teens, your parents are rich, but you're broke. You have to figure out, how to do it yourself. And we'll help you and we'll backstop you, but you need to have skin in this game and you need to put effort in there and you need to figure out your plan. And as part of that, though, we don't tell them what they have to do. Like we guide them and we try and inspire them and we give them the skill sets to learn how to do all these things. But we let them have the decision making so that they do feel ownership in those choices. And because they see how the way we treat them, in other words, they're in school, they went to a private school. It's like, yeah, we don't buy fancy clothes because our parents won't pay for it. So they learned that they don't need that as well, too. So it takes a traumatic amount of being intentional with how to raise kids because we knew that we would leave them wealth and we didn't want them to blow it.
Well, and that's, I think, the right approach, to be able to help them understand that. My granny, the longest conversation she had with me about wealth, and she had married my grandfather who came from the Pillsbury family. He's Bill Pillsbury, and so the Pillsburys had owned Century Electric Motor Company here in St. Louis. And so I'm a fifth generation to St. Louis, but my point is that he had created a significant amount of wealth with his father and his brothers, and then passed that along to my granny, and then she had also passed that forward to my aunt and uncle and my parents. But by the time it got to us, it all had been donated or given to nonprofits. And the conversation that she had shared with me was, son, if you had the opportunity to purchase a piece of land, what would you do with it? And I was a young teenager at the time. And I said, well, Granny, I don't know. And she said, well, here's what I would do. I would harvest all the hardwood and I'd sell it off for a profit. And then I'd clear the ground and I'd have it mineral tested before I actually bought the property. And then I'd go ahead and assay it and then harvest it for the quarry and create a quarry out of it for anything, the minerals I could. And then I'd create it into a dump and they would then go ahead and fill that up with all the trash and I'd charge people to put it there. And then they would seal it over and I'd create a development and put it on top of it. And that's how you should look at raw land. And I said, well, thanks, Granny. And that's the only conversation I'd ever had. But because she didn't leave anything in perpetuity to us, what it reminded me of was she was telling me, you're not going to get anything, but this is how to do it, and you need to go out there and get it done. And it was from that standpoint of not feeling an entitlement, but to go out and make it happen for ourselves. Because of that experience, Rocky, it led me to have to really pursue this idea of being a financial steward. And so that's what brought me into this career, was because my dad looked at me and said, son, I'm in full-time ministry. You're my retirement plan. I thought he was joking. But after I realized he had he had not been kidding about me getting my Eagle Scout before I could drive, I took him seriously. And that's what really propelled me to be here and compelled me to be here. And there was a book that I read called Family Wealth by James E. Hughes that really does a great job of breaking down what I was just talking about a little bit earlier, but helping understand how to be able to build the family and to have these conversations of really being able to realize that it's everyone being responsible versus being entitled. And what you had to overcome to accomplish the goals of reaching the success that you've had, and for your kids to be able to realize it's not just given to them, that they've got to go out and earn it or build it their own way. I had another friend that his family is a fourth generation, going on, I guess he was fifth generation in their wealth, and they had amassed a significant inheritance and a significant family estate. But they told him that he could not participate in the family wealth until he owned and became a landlord of over 100 homes. So he had created his own wealth outside of the family wealth before he could participate in helping make the decisions for how the family wealth was invested. There's a number of different creative stories I could share with you, but those are just a couple.
And building generational wealth is difficult, and it takes effort. And that was a pretty high bar for them to set for him, to say that you've got to go out and do it. And I've heard those kinds of stories from other families as well. It's especially when they own family companies. It's like, you're not allowed to work in this company until you go out and show success somewhere else, because we don't want you to think it's entitled, and it creates a lot of internal conflict within the companies as well. And so you've got to kind of go do that. So is that how you ended up deciding to make financial planning your career?
I had seen a gentleman when we lived in Russia back in 93 through 96. It was my senior year of high school and 2 years following. I did an internship there with the Navigators in international finance and accounting. And during that time, I witnessed a gentleman that come over, and he was able to, I was commissioned with taking them throughout St. Petersburg and Moscow on a tour and being their tour guide. And they had a couple translators that were working with this group of people that was serving at the time. And as I watched this gentleman interact and engage with other people in ministry throughout the city, I noticed that after he was done with each event, the person that he went up to thank would oftentimes start crying. And I went up to him and I asked him, after a couple days of witnessing this, I said, Richard, what is it that you're saying to them, and what are you giving them that's making them cry? And he said, well, Jonathan, I carry around a wad of $100 bills, and I've prepared myself for this trip so that if I see those people in need that I'm really moved by to give to, I can do that. And I guess that's why they've responded the way they have. That empowered me to say, I don't know what it is that you do, but I want to do it. And lo and behold, he said he was in international finance and wealth management, and I had no clue what that meant. And so I decided I had to go to school for international business and marketing and one day get into finance, and that here I am, because I wanted to be able to have that same impact in other people's lives.
That's very inspiring. As I read through your site and I look at some of the things you talk about, I see one word pop up a lot, and that word is holistic. What does that mean to you?
When it comes to finances and wealth management, we really see that it needs to be a collaborative team that helps think through navigating change in a family's life or an individual's life or a business owner. And so that change can take on any number of requirements, from working with CPAs or estate attorneys or business attorneys or with a wealth manager and even a larger council. And so when we think of holistic, it has to be completely independent, and each fiduciary continue to operate in their capacity as a fiduciary, rather than it being pigeonholed to be a product sale or a temporary solution without thinking of how to elevate the overall plan or strategy for the families or the business owners that we serve.
And I know you said a lot of these people are fiduciaries. I struggled a lot when I was younger, because most of the people that I saw out there weren't fiduciaries. They were salespeople in the financial space. And the problem was when you don't have a lot of money, it's hard to probably find a fiduciary, because they're all working with the people who have lots of money. And so I think people just need to be aware of that and figure their way through that. And that means that you need to make sure you take responsibility for yourself, unless you know the motives of the person that you're dealing with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and typically what you can find is that if someone has been a fiduciary, that means that they are willing and able to work more collaboratively with other professionals that are in the same boat as far as being a fiduciary. Whereas most of them are independent versus working for just a large wirehouse or brokerage firm because they're not pigeonholed to only offer one product or solution.
And we'll talk more about creating your team a little bit later. Before we do that, I want to jump back to Russia. You spent a few years living in Russia, and that must have been a very different economic system. I'm sure you have some lessons that you learned back then that continue to influence you today.
Yeah, Rocky, it was an amazing time because when I was there, I was 17 when we got to Russia, and it was my senior year of high school, and the ruble per US dollar was 50 Russian rubles for $1 US. By the time we left, this was just right after the perestroika and the collapse of communism. And so they're going through and having the full reconstruction of their government and economy. By the time we left, it was 5,000 rubles per US dollar. So if you think about it, if you're living off of $5,000 a month right now, that's about $60,000 a year. And you may be okay or just been making it by for most of the U.S. But when you think of that being what you were living off of to now only covering a lunch at McDonald's, instead of it covering a month, it's covering a meal, then that makes a significant difference in how people adjust for change and such economic upheaval. So what it taught me was, how do we protect ourselves against that type of economic change and monetary reconstruction if that ever happened within our own economy here in the U.S., and how to be prepared for that. And it really was an amazing experience because I learned that you had to keep track of things on an hour-by-hour basis and with long-term goals rather than a month or a quarter-by-quarter, because there's so much volatility in that change.
And so I was having this conversation with someone else this morning who also kind of raised the alarm bell of, because of all the things going on in the world, and also because the United States government is spending so much, that there is a higher likelihood of that happening in the U.S. Do you think that's a possibility? And if so, what do we do to prevent or protect ourselves?
Absolutely. And that's a great question, Rocky. And you're probably familiar with usdebtclock.org. That's a website I refer to often just to be able to reflect on where the status of our current national debt is. And it's amazing that how far we've gone as a country without even looking at the most recent stimulus packages that have been offered or provided by the time this is produced. We're looking at the country has just clipped through over $24 trillion of debt without even considering the additional economic stimulus that we're seeing being infused into our country now. And so when we're looking at what that means, it really is taking a look at the country has two forms of way of dealing with that. Either they can increase revenues or they can decrease spending. Well, so far, we're not seeing a decrease in spending. They're hoping that they can reduce taxes to increase revenues, but you have to really have both a reduction of spending and an increase in savings in order to pay off that amount of debt. And there is a book written by David McKnight called The Power of Zero, where he talks about the economic and sovereign debt crisis that we will experience. And he had interviewed a number of leading economists in the last couple of years and published a documentary called The Power of Zero, The Tax Train is Coming. And if you guys ever have a chance to watch that or read that book, you'll really be impressed because he starts off with having interviewed the former Comptroller General David Walker of the U.S., and he gives his own thoughts about why there will have to be a significant increase in taxes to historical highs in order to be able to offset the amount of debt that our country's taken on.
And I've already heard that our governor, where I live, is already talking about the fact that he's going to have to raise taxes to pay for all the stimulus. And that's just at the local level. I know at the federal level, it probably will happen. And we've had record low taxes because of all the Trump plan. But we've been running at higher and higher deficits because of it. And so it's either higher taxes or they inflate our money, which is kind of what you talked about in Russia, where it was 100-fold inflation. And that's not anything anybody ever wants to experience.
Oh, absolutely not. If going from living in the city to having to living in the country and rationing food is, I don't think, everyone's desire.
No. So how do we protect ourselves from these types of systemic risks?
Well, the majority of families' wealth today that have built it traditionally through saving through a 401k or through retirement plans, mostly have kicked the bucket or kicked the can down the road, proverbially speaking, as far as not having paid taxes on those dollars now. We live in a unique, unprecedented time for historical low tax brackets, and really have been gifted with this time, hopefully through the when this current tax reform will sunset in December 31st of 2025. That may change sooner because of how much more debt we're taking on as a country. But when we think about families that have created their wealth because of savings and IRAs and 401ks and created their wealth through those vehicles, when there were historically higher interest rates, are now an incredible opportunity to convert their IRAs into into a Roth account, paying taxes on their IRAs with historical low tax brackets, so that they can be able to then allow their funds to continue growing tax-free and tax-exempt when they withdraw them, and also be passed on to kids tax-free. And so that's one way, but it has to be paired with a tax strategy when you do, because otherwise, if you don't have a tax credit or some type of deduction to offset that payment that you would owe to the IRS, that tax liability, then you're just out the money. And so traditional advisors have always said, just do a Roth conversion, or here's where it does or doesn't make sense. But what we found is that when you've worked strategically with a collaborative team of CPAs and advisors, you can be able to create a strategy that helps offset the tax liability with other tax credits. And that would be the first. That would be the first way, taxes being the first thing to mitigate. The second would be looking at how can you diversify and have uncorrelated investment strategies so that you can weather through a storm of, I would say, hyperinflation. Now, we've seen it happen in other countries, and so you would look for strategies that incorporate that, but they have to be uncorrelated to one another.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man Podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man Podcast is a must-listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. And so can you help the audience better understand what uncorrelated assets would be?
Sure. So uncorrelated assets, Rocky, in my mind, is they're unrelated as far as how they behave and any type of economic change. So like, for example, if I'm invested in the stock market and I've got technology, I've got oil and gas, I've got real estate, all in the stock market, meaning that it's something I can buy and sell through my Charles Schwab account or through Fidelity. I can go through any brokerage to buy them. And I buy and sell those different equities. They may seem and feel like they're not the same. But during a market correction, like what we've seen earlier in 2020, then all of them behave very similarly because they're all in the stock market. They're being bought and sold by investors that have irrational behavior. Not irrational behavior meaning that it's not always logical, it's emotionally driven. So traditionally people buy high and sell low. And when that's the case, when you're using correlated because they're following market tendencies to be up or down, then everything's exposed to the same type of market risk. But when they're uncorrelated, it could truly be that they are one to be real estate in another country, while you'd have also real estate in the U.S. Those may be uncorrelated while they're the same asset, but two different economies that could influence whether they're having a bull market or a bear market or recession in real estate. So that's an example using real estate. You could use that for any other asset classes, but they're traditionally unrelated to one another.
So what would be some other asset classes besides paper assets and real estate?
Well, one that's growing in popularity is also looking at viatical settlements, which is life insurance settlements. So life insurance policies that people have taken out in the past that they no longer have a beneficiary that they want to leave that to, or maybe they've had their own estate eroded because of market corrections, and they're looking for another asset that they can sell. There's investor pools and also companies that are buying those from those individuals through now an exchange, where that can create, an investor can invest into a company that purchases these life insurance policies from individuals and keeps those policies in force until that person passes away. Now, it benefits both the person that sold the policy that was on their life to that investor pool, because they get money that they wouldn't have otherwise have had. And it also benefits the investors, because once that person passes away, then the death benefits paid out to that firm. And so that's a uncorrelated asset, in addition to a number of other strategies that can be used, but just a couple to mention. Another may be some tax strategies we've looked at, and we could further explore that if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be a good idea.
So when you think of tax strategies, they're always going through and being evaluated or being sought after by the IRS to define who is taking advantage of them versus who's actually following the law. And so you have to know that this changes over time, and so the tax credits and strategies have to be evaluated year by year. But one, for example, would be solar. And so if we thought of how Tesla had originally built their company, it was really by leveraging tax credits and tax credits for when their vehicles are sold as an incentive for people to purchase their vehicles. You could use leveraged tax strategies that will be able to pass on a greater benefit of the tax credit to the individual by how that's structured. And so solar is an excellent example of that. Because up until last year, I believe it was a 30% discount. This year has dropped, and it will continue to drop each year after 2020. But those are a couple examples, because when leveraged correctly, we can use that to create an income stream for individuals for a 25-year period through how we leverage the tax credits and also create it to be an income-producing asset that's uncorrelated to the stock market.
Interesting. I'm learning about so many different opportunities. It becomes mind-numbing to figure out which one you do and how do you choose between all of them. And the fact that there are so many of these little teeny strategies that are out there that are kind of unique. And I just learned of one just recently with 529 plans that will probably save me probably close to $2,000 a year, which was interesting. And it's trying to figure them all out and then figuring out which one best applies to you. One of the struggles I see, though, sometimes I see people make decisions that aren't in line with what they should. So they do something because they can get a tax break, but it may not necessarily be their smartest move. So I think you have to take the time to look at this thing and in the bigger picture of how does it make sense with your bigger plan, which we kind of touched on that earlier. And we talked about having a team. And so who should be on people's teams, and how do we make sure they're all working together?
Well, it's good to always appoint a quarterback, and typically the wealth manager will be the quarterback on the team to help collaboratively set up those meetings and also create the agendas and make sure that everyone has a vault to share the information together. Documenting the goal and getting clarity, first of all, is really the first step. What we found amongst most of our clients and also the members of our firm was that they had one common trait prior to coming here, and that was most of them lacked a clarity on the vision of their goals. And so when you're forming a team and you lack clarity, it's harder to get a collaborative strategy that would enhance the overall recommendation. So first, getting real clear on the goals that you have for your family and understanding what is the goal and purpose of my money that I need to achieve. And then once you've done that, then you can have a team come together. And that could be the CPA, it could be the estate attorney, it could be your wealth manager or insurance advisor. But when you bring them all together, and a couple of them may be the same person, but when you bring 2 or 3, 4 or 5 people together to have an open discussion without taking offense and being able to discuss what are some of those strategies that could help accomplish that goal that you have, and then put it into writing so it can be measured, and then agree to coming back to evaluating how is that plan working out over each year or each quarter. It can help a family stay on track of knowing who's the right advisor to keep on the team. Because what I believe is that when you have a rising tide, it lifts all boats. And when you have guys working together and they're experts in their field, it's going to become pretty apparent pretty quickly of who should be on the team and who should be out based off their level of professionalism and expertise.
And one of the things that happens, I think, a lot of times is people aren't even clear to their advisors on what their bigger goals are. They don't have that deeper conversation, probably half the time because they don't even think about it themselves. And they can make decisions that have consequences that could have been avoided.
Absolutely.
Do you see that a lot, that people aren't having the right conversations with their advisors?
Well, I have an example for you. I could share that with you real quick. We had one of our advisors down in Scottsdale. He had a client come and join him recently after her own personal experience where her husband had passed away, and she and her husband had amassed a significant estate. They had invested in long-term care communities, and so they had a number of properties throughout the U.S. One of the properties that they had was in Chicago, where she and her husband had resided, but after he passed away, she moved down to be closer to the family in Scottsdale. And she told her CPA, she said, you know what, would you go ahead and sell this property in Chicago for me, because I no longer have a need for it, I have more than enough, and I'd really just not like to deal with the headache of having to go up there. He said, sure. So a couple months go by, and he gives her a call and says, ma'am, would you come in? I have some paperwork for you to sign and a check for you. And so she came in and signed the paperwork, and then he said, all right, here's your check, and slid her a check across the table for $3 million. And she said, okay, well, thank you so much. If you'd go ahead and give this to our church, because I really don't need the money. And he said, oh, I did not know that's what you want to do with the money. And she said, well, why are you having this response? And he told her, well, ma'am, if you had told me that this is what you want to do, I could have set the whole thing up to be gifted to the church and then sold it so the church would have received the entire amount. As it is, over 40% went to the government. And so I could have given them over $5.5 million versus the $3 million that you just received. So just by not having clarity by the advisor not having asked the right question, it wasn't that either of them were had ill intent. It's just that they had not discussed it and been able to create a strategy or a plan to help her accomplish what her end goal was.
And that's important to ask that question, right? You want to sell the property. What are your plans for the money after you sell it? What are your intentions? What are we going to do with this? a simple question could have changed things out and saved
Absolutely.
a couple $1,000,000, which is, it's a
Absolutely.
shame.
Yeah.
But those are the things that we have to do is have those deeper conversations. And, it's a theme all the way through, whether it's with your kids, your family, with your advisors, whoever you're dealing with is being clear and being open about what it is that you want so that they can help you achieve it in the best possible way.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I know, you actually use the Profit First system within your business.
We do.
How has it worked out for you?
Excellent. There's been a couple of major transitions we've had for our own firm over the past 2 years. One is we had originally been associated with another firm, another RIA out of Colorado, and we broke away from them in 2018 and went independent and bought into a larger firm that we're owners of called Lion Street, that's based out of Austin, Texas. And had we not been employing Profit First, it wouldn't have allowed us to be able to make that transition without taking on additional debt or liability. But because we employed Profit First and the use of essentially it's a cash envelope system for business owners, it allowed for us to be able to plan for it, make the transition, and still, with the grace of God, be able to have enough in our coffers to be able to keep the doors open. And so in the midst of having incremental cash flow, it allowed for us to really be able to weather through the storm of the just financial and seasonality of cash movement within our business. And it turned out to be incredibly prosperous for us, and so glad that we're using it and continue to use it today.
And that's what most businesses find. Everyone thinks it's so simple and it's so easy. And in many senses, it is simple and easy. So is a diet and exercise. But we don't do it, right? We don't do the simple, easy things that are right for us. And I've heard that over and over again from businesses, that those that implement it, in these tough times, they're sitting on large cash reserves. They have the ability to do things. They have peace, and they just are okay because their cash flow is appropriate and they're spending appropriately. And they're watching their numbers, and they can see it actually occur, and they can see where it's flowing kind of much more viscerally than you do when you look at bank accounts and spreadsheets. And from that standpoint, it's been phenomenal for them. So have you asked, or have you had your customers who are business owners implement it?
We have. In fact, we've worked with, I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Love the Lou here in St. Louis, and they're an inner city ministry that's focused on really rebuilding and providing healing and reconciliation in our city. And so we started coaching them over 3 years ago on the use of Profit First, and it has really transformed their own ministry and how they're able to manage cash and influence and help families here locally. We've also done that with our business owners and did it the same, just exactly how we apply it and what's written in Michael's book, Michael Michalowicz's book called Profit First. And it's really been easily used from whether it's nonprofit or businesses, regardless of size or starting point. So it does take some time to be able to implement it if it's not a system that you're used to. And so that's something that's gradually increased, but you got to start with a point, right? Even if it's setting up each of the accounts that he recommends for taxes or for operating expenses or for owner's comp or for profit, you've got to start somewhere, and just putting even 1% a quarter into your profit and then increasing that each quarter throughout the year really helps you put, and maybe it's not that aggressive for us. That's how we decided to start it, but it took time to implement it, but it's definitely been successful. And then holding each other accountable, or holding our business owners accountable to accomplish it as well, right? Because it's just like when you're going on a diet, if you don't have someone that's helped you with eating smart or has a plan that you can be a part of, that you're accountable to, it can be easy to get derailed from it. And so having a coach or having someone that's able to help you with that is imperative.
And that it is. We always like to give everyone something that they can accomplish this week, somewhat of an action step. Do you have an action step that you think people could take this week to help improve their lives?
First action step would be to, in my mind, would be to take a moment to look at what is your goal for this year. When it comes to money, how are you going to be purposeful about it? Where are you going to start, or what have you already started that you need to continue? And then evaluate what you need to stop doing or what you need to continue doing to hit that goal, or what you can do to improve.
And that's true. I mean, if you want to improve something, whether it be your money situation, your diet, your exercise, there are things you have to stop doing, things you have to start doing, and things you have to do better. And I think it applies to every single area. And so this, at the core is having the financial abundance to be able to do what you want. And obviously, we always need to keep coming back and revisiting that and making sure that it is going according to our plan. And as things change in the world, we need to kind of stop and recheck those markets and make sure we're doing well. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
My secret would be putting God first in my life. And that means taking the time to be able to, in your spiritual walk with God, to be able to really confess who you are, in my mind is who I am in Christ, of who I am in relationship with God each day. And to be able to know that I can trust it all over to Him, that I don't have to have all the answers, but I can ask for wisdom and guidance, and that God is faithful to answer those and give me clarity as I take each step of faith. Throughout each day, I don't have a true knowledge of what's going to happen by the end of the day. I have an idea of what I hope to accomplish, but I have to have some faith that God's giving me direction and putting those things in front of me, and knowing that everyone needs a little bit of grace and a little bit of love. And when you apply that, there's a lot of truth that can reign in building those relationships and that success.
And we all need a little bit of grace and love. And I think everyone needs to figure out for themselves, what is your spiritual journey? What do you believe in? And then walk in alignment with whatever that is.
That's right.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
When you go through a hard time, find ways to go through it faster. You're always going to go through a hard time, but if you wallow in the hard time, it will prolong the hard time. If you are able to put your head down and seek advice and seek wisdom and be able to really it's kind of the book by Josh, I forget his last name. He wrote the book, A Slight Edge. If you're able to apply those specific areas in your life from the wisdom that you learned during the hard times, you'll soon find yourself achieving greatness that you never thought you could accomplish. And although I'd heard it in the midst of the hard times, it wasn't easy to apply. And applying it, now looking at myself where we are today, I just continue to say, do it again.
And that's very true. Taking action instead of just wallowing in your issues definitely helps to get things moving faster. You may not have the perfect answer, but at least you're moving.
That's right.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Rocky, that's a good question. Take the time to get a clear, concise mental picture of what you want to achieve. And then identify what is your burning desire. And are they in alignment? And then set a plan to develop the goals to how to achieve that clear, concise mental picture. Develop the steps to achieve that goal. Outline the tasks that you need to accomplish it. And then something that's achievable on a day-to-day basis So it's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and you can have it on a timetable to accomplish those goals. And that's what I'd say at an 18-year-old, what you could do.
You've got to take this big picture thing, right? And bring it down to what's the next step I can take today.
That's right.
And make it easy so that you can just keep taking those steps, because you've got a long journey at 18. And at least if you know what direction you're going, it makes it a lot better over time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If people would like to find you, connect, listen to your podcast, what's the best way for them to do that?
It's easy to visit us at Lionsgate Advisors. Lionsgate is spelled just like the entertainment company, but lionsgateadvisors.com. And if you're a business owner, if you'd like a free or complimentary evaluation of your company, you can go to our evaluation tool there and help you be able to benchmark what your company is currently worth or valued. And we'd be happy to assess that for you and get back in touch. But that's probably the best way to reach out and connect with us is through our website, lionsgateadvisors.com/business and or services in the business, and you can be able to see us there if you haven't found that forum on our main page.
And I will put that in the show notes to make it easy for people to find you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Rocky. I appreciate it.
I enjoyed the conversation with Jonathan, and I believe we are very much in alignment in our worldviews. His action step was, what's your goal for this year with money? What changes do you need to make to ensure you achieve them? Money is just one part of life. It's also the fuel that can allow you to have the ability to do whatever you choose. We need clarity and goals, and then just start taking action steps towards achieving them. As Jonathan said, who are you putting on your team to build the life you deserve? Taking no action creates a far worse outcome in life than trying something and failing. I can help you achieve your dreams through coaching and accountability. Just email me or use the scheduling link in the show notes, and we can start with a short chat to see if we're a good fit. For many people, one session allows them to take a giant leap forward towards their dreams. We can also connect on the Facebook page or Facebook group for Richer Soul. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.